Welcome to Hamburger Business Review. I'm your host, Mike Merrill, and today we're going to talk about the relationship between IP, intellectual property, and fast food. Maybe they aren't giving us free content as a way to sell food, but instead selling us food as a way to fund the content?
I'm your host, Zach Rose. On today's show, we'll also dig into more of Mike's firsthand experience working undercover at a hamburger restaurant.
I'm producer Chris Higgins with a reminder for Zach. Don't forget, I have some questions about your upcoming pilgrimage to visit every McDonald's in Manhattan in a single 24-hour period. That is McTrot, and it's going to be a long, long walk.
Our case study later this episode is about the 2014 expired meat scandal at McDonald's in China. Obviously, this echoes what's been going on with the American E. coli outbreak here in 2024.
But I actually want to kick things off with some news about chicken.
I saw a story that is not about necessarily the hamburger business or the cousin of the hamburger business, which is the world of chicken, which we're seeing the hamburger business get more and more involved in for various reasons. It's Chick-fil-A's Play app. The reason this is interesting is back in season 1, I talked about the idea that all of these companies like McDonald's are actually IP companies. They're all becoming new Disneys, essentially. Chick-fil-A, a restaurant chain, announces they're going to have this app. They've described it as a digital playground centered on listen, play, create, and read. We'll see what happens with this, but it reminds me of earlier this year, McDonald's did this promo where they launched a series of 4 anime shorts, and they got a Japanese company to do these anime and manga shorts, and they did this whole McDonald's thing and had a special sauce and this launch. That also tied into their big investor day where they talked a lot about the value of the IP of these brands. And then also that content, and especially the fact that they have this app in everyone's hands, is such a big play that they can do things with, like interactive stories. And they hinted at all of these things that they might do.
Mike, I'm curious, how did you hear about the Chick-fil-A Play app?
It might have been just through looking through QSR news.
Sorry, what's QSR?
Quick serve restaurants.
Quick service restaurant.
Quick service restaurants.
You might notice it's fast food. In the industry, we call it QSR.
The reason I ask, Mike, is I can't, I'm looking at this story. The McDonald's thing I can understand. They're making content. They're tying it into a new sauce. They're releasing, a new McDonald's meal. It's all very tied together. It's cohesive. It becomes a project. This app for kids, is it? Digital playground, not necessarily for kids. I don't know who's going to use this.
It's all a battle for attention, because if you're paying attention to Chick-fil-A versus McDonald's, you're more likely to buy Chick-fil-A.
Oh, okay. So it's got original animated shows, podcasts, games, ebooks, and more.
Oh, no.
So it is actually like a little Amazon Prime or something.
It's not long until you're going to see the Chick-fil-A theme park,
Oh, and with the Chick-fil-A brand, the Chick-fil-A, the very specifics of who Chick-fil-A is, this is starting to come together.
I used to work in the mobile app space as a coder and a whatever. There was a real gold rush, for years there with the advent of smartphones and app stores to just have an app for everything. There was just a sort of unspoken assumption that everything needs an app. And if we have an app, people will use the app. And just, reading words like listen, play, create, and read, none of which I associate with Chick-fil-A or wish to associate with Chick-fil-A. What does that mean exactly? I think those are all good words. I like to do those things in my life, but not in the context of a Chick-fil-A mobile app, So I'm not sure this is going to go anywhere, but I guess we'll keep an eye on it.
In this story here, they've got a scene from one of the Chick-fil-A app's original series, and it's like 2 cows in a kind of a Wallace and Gromit situation, ties into their marketing about the cows are doing something to encourage the chickens.
That's kind of what they've got, right? Is the cows talking about chicken.
Yeah, that's that. And I think the religious element, which we'll see how that ties into their content universe.
It'd be interesting how that plays out on their app. Every Sunday you get a new sermon.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess In-N-Out, do they still have the Bible verse printed on the cup? If you look on the bottom inside label of the cup of a
Really?
In-N-Out, it'll have, I can't remember what Bible verse it is, but they have
like a psalm or something?
Just the reference to it, not the actual verse itself.
Just, yeah.
Are they using the Bible to sell burgers, or are they using burgers to sell the Bible?
I have no response.
That's an upcoming case study from Hamburger Business Review.
And speaking of IP, we also have an update in the long-running story about McDonald's and the individual franchise's ability to fix their own McFlurry machines. What's going on here, Mike?
Well, I mean, I can speak from personal experience at my hamburger restaurant. The frozen machines are often out of order, and it is occasionally such a big deal that a customer will simply leave the drive-thru once their favorite item, whatever it is not available.
Do they ask first, is the machine working, or do they just ask for the product?
They have been trained to. Many of them will now, but often it's, 3/4 of the way into their order, and they simply are like, they'll try another one. They'll try another hamburger restaurant that's machines might be up and working.
And when this happens in the restaurant, is there like a bell that rings that like, oh, it's down now? Like, how does the information get to you?
So in the system that we use for the register, it's like a touch screen. There's all these buttons, and on one of the screens is all the desserts, and they'll simply gray out when things aren't available.
Yeah.
But you can't always trust that. So oftentimes you just have to check. So usually once a day, you'll check. If I'm smart and I'll remember when I first go in on my shift, I'll check.
I remember somebody wrote a web scraper that would go out and look at all the McDonald's menus for every restaurant and infer whether the machine was running. And they made a map of the US with all of the working and broken McDonald's machines. Mm-hmm. That was a huge story in our world.
Well, yeah, exactly.
But the reason the machines are always down, from what I understand, is that the company that makes them also has a service contract and they maintain them, and they don't want third parties opening the machine and trying to fix it.
And in fact, the machines are programmed in a way with these digital locks that don't allow you to access certain parts of the machine unless you have these codes that are only available from the technicians.
What's our news item here? What has changed in this situation?
This company called iFixit.
Chris, could you explain for our audience what iFixit is?
iFixit is this creator of tools and guides to open and fix your own devices. Back in the day, it'd be like, oh, my iPod battery wore out. And so you'd go online and there'd be this take apart guide where it's like, oh, you need a screwdriver that's like Torx number 8. And then you need the little other thing. And it walks you through taking it all apart and then tells you what part to put in there. And there's pictures and the whole thing. Now, as time has marched on, iFixit has become an advocate for what we call right to repair, the ability to get into devices that you own and repair them or modify them or whatever. And there's been this sort of push-pull going on. And there's a whole movement. It's not just iFixit, but they're a visible mouthpiece.
There was a John Deere issue with this, with the
tractors, yeah.
Massive tractors that these farms would use, and they would get trapped into these service contracts, I remember.
Yeah, and that's one of those like tall poppy issues where when you hear that like American farmers have bought a $50,000 tractor or something, and then they can't repair it without calling out a service provider that's going to charge them, some arbitrary number, then that feels like it strikes at the heart of American values.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a way that's saying, oh, I can't take apart my iPhone and change the battery. Like a lot of people are kind of like, who cares? But then when the farmers got involved, I think that's when public opinion really began to shift here. And so you see companies responding to this. The
image I have of, I've never farmed a day in my life, but the image I have of farmers is that they are constantly coming up with crazy hacks to fix broken things. Mm-hmm. They've got this sort of rugged consumerism in the American psyche.
The idea that the two issues that iFixit has been able to kind of break through to me, a person who generally doesn't fix my own things for, is John Deere tractors and McFlurry machines is really interesting and probably says something about America. You are now allowed, as a owner of a McDonald's franchise, you are now able to attempt to repair your own McFlurry machine.
What a world we live in now. You can attempt to repair your own machine.
My favorite part of this was the quote from the woman who's the representative for Public Knowledge, the organization, the advocacy organization that works for Right to Repair. It's so good. She said, "There's nothing vanilla about this victory. An exemption for retail-level commercial food preparation equipment will spark a flurry of third-party repair activity and enable businesses to better serve their customers."
Bravo.
I just love the sense of humor and playfulness. Mm-hmm. And also strange that this consumer advocacy group is sort of working on behalf of and defending McDonald's as part of, incidentally, but as part of this initiative.
We're going to get into this later in the episode, but I think it's interesting that McDonald's sometimes relies on sort of government and advocacy groups to do their work for them. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it last episode, even with their willingness to work with Greenpeace and use those organizations as a way to highlight issues and kind of prove that they're doing the right thing. That is really interesting. Mm-hmm. Speaking of some of that controversy, obviously the big story that we touched on last week that is continuing is the E. coli story.
Mike, what's your experience been in your hamburger restaurant? I'm curious if this is bleeding over and people are cutting down on their large hamburger with onion orders.
My most recent day at work was the day that all of this came out. Then I had 2 days off in the middle of the week, and I was watching as McDonald's responded, consumers responded, kind of wondering, oh, how's this going to affect the hamburger restaurant? I came back on a Friday, I think it was, and no one was saying anything. Like, I felt like I knew more because of my obsession about this than anyone was really talking about. And then I heard that the last 2 days, lunch had just been like dead. Like, the numbers were way down at the hamburger restaurant.
It seems like this E. coli outbreak has overshadowed McDonald's sort of business plans and the agenda that they wanted to have for this quarter. The average price of McDonald's menu items is about 40% over the last 5 years.
Wait, the average price of McDonald's menu items is up 40% over 5 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
There was a congressional inquiry about this. They actually...
Sure.
Yeah, there's a concern that the prices are too damn high for the hamburgers. Mm-hmm. And this just started to happen right when the E. coli story hit. And it's the CEO of McDonald's kind of extended this promo period that McDonald's is having with some of the
$5 meal. Yeah.
In order to sort of maintain kind of steady traffic of McDonald's, all of which has been kind of decimated by this E. coli story. The earnings just came out from McDonald's recently on the corporate side, and I think earnings per share were up a little bit, but obviously...
That's trailing, yeah.
Yeah, the stock is still down because of this issue. Personally, I believe temporarily, but I think we'll see that kind of correct back to a higher price. But I think we'll see the long-term problem of McDonald's being expensive is going to come back as the E. coli story fades. Again, I see this every day at my hamburger restaurant. Even in the briefest of interactions at the drive-thru or out on the floor talking to people, there is a complaint about prices.
Makes sense, but that's a good opening to talk about Mike and his hamburger restaurant. Mike, I have a question for you today. When you're in the restaurant, where do you spend most of your time?
I started out learning drive-thru. I was mostly on that first station taking orders and handing out money. It's when I started, it was just taking orders, learning that computer system.
Oh, you hand out money? That's what you do?
Well, yeah. If they hand you money, you hand some back usually.
Uh-huh.
But so of those two computers that you're kind of running at that back station, I would usually just run one of them when I got started and I was very slow. Mm-hmm. And someone else would deal with running all the cards, money in and out. Then as I sort of ramped up, I started occasionally doing that by myself, which is an absolutely insane one-person job because headset on, I'm saying, welcome to the hamburger restaurant. Are you using the mobile app? Do you have a code? How many creams and sugars do you want in your coffee? How many of this? How many of that? So I'm entering all of that on one machine while I have the drive-thru window open, hopefully not making change, but sometimes, they hand you a 20 and then you're making change as you're touching. So all of these different screens, it feels like the most boring version of an air traffic controller, like just in the sense that you just have like one after another and you're just kind of like, okay, you move forward, you move forward, you move forward, you move forward.
Well, and when you're talking through the drive-through speaker thing, do you press a button on the headset? Like, how does that turn on and off?
There's a button on the headset to turn it on, and it will automatically turn off when they move away. But you do, if I'm interacting with the person on at the drive-through who's doing the ordering on the headset, and then I have to talk to the person at the window, I do have to turn it off. And so often I will find myself having two conversations. And I will try to slow the person down who's ordering. Like I'll be like, oh, did you want this or that, when I kind of could infer what they wanted? You know, I kind of knew they wanted just the sandwich and not the meal deal or whatever. But I'll ask, then I'll ignore what they say and be like, oh, you're all set. You can go to the next window. Or did you need your receipt? You're all set. A lot of hand motions, a lot of like just a thumbs up or a pointing over there to the next window if it's not clear. When it works smoothly, it's beautiful. And then one little snag will hit. Somebody will take too long or do something weird with change. And it throws the whole thing off.
Mm-hmm. This is reminding me, Mike, of a series of questions I want to ask you about how to be the best McDonald's customer.
Oh,
I have a lot of thoughts about this. Because working at a hamburger restaurant, there's an order to the way the system makes us enter things that is maybe counter to the way you might say the order.
Yeah, I want to know all that stuff.
And just for the one example I'll give is we have all of the drinks, all this kind of specialty coffee items. So if you're like, I want a latte with caramel, can you make it a medium? Well, I have to hit size first. Mm-hmm. So you said size last, so I have to remember what you said and then start entering once you say the last thing you said. So I need size, then item, then flavor, then any customizations. And some people will do that in the reverse. Do you remember this trend of N+1 mind games? It was supposed to like prevent Alzheimer's or whatever. It was like this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you have to remember the thing before the thing. There's a lot of that where, and maybe did I talk about cream and sugar with the senior coffees before?
Not here. What is that?
There's a classic order. It's one of my favorite orders. An old man will come through and be like, you know, in a very muffled way, senior coffee 4 and 4. And you're like, oh, that was a senior coffee 4 and 4.
Uh-huh.
And if he doesn't specify, that means 4 and 4 inside. But there's 4 and 4 inside and 4 and 4 outside. It's always cream, then sugar.
Sorry, what's inside and outside?
Oh, inside is, are we putting the cream and sugar in your coffee for you, or are we giving you packets on the outside?
Okay, so like a handful of the creamers and a handful of the pack. Okay.
Again, and people have strong preferences about both. Or is it Splenda or Extra?
But what's the default?
2 and 2 is usually the default.
But is it default inside or default outside?
Oh, default is, it's a mix. It's honestly 50-50. People are really particular about the coffee.
Wow. Okay.
But sometimes people will say sugar first, which always throws my muscle memory because I'm so used to hitting cream then sugar. And so I'll be like, wait, I'm sorry, did you say?
Oh, so they'll say 2 sugars, 4 creams or something. And then, but you have to, what does that mean for you?
You have to flip it around.
So I have to go size, then coffee, then into the cream and sugar. So by the time
wait, size, then coffee?
Yeah.
So it can't be like coffee, medium.
It'll default to a size and then I can change it, but that's more button presses. So it's you're always trying to find what's the least number of buttons to press. Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting about that is like, if you order 10 of something, I can enter 10 and then the item. But if you're ordering 10 coffees, I actually want to enter those generally one at a time because each one might be customized in a different way. So there's all these like different tricks that way. But yeah, just as an example, it's knowing the way the register works makes you a better customer. There's a woman who comes in for breakfast and she has a really, really specific order and she's a regular. I think we even know her name. Like people will shout out, it's so, I can't remember what her name is, but they'll be like, it's so-and-so. And everyone in the restaurant knows, oh, this is the order. This is how it needs to be prepped. But she's really specific and she's learned our internal language for all of these things.
Beautiful. It's like Starbucks tries to get you to do.
Yeah, because she wants her order a very specific way, which, you know, I appreciate, you know. I really appreciate people that know their order but aren't so fast and dismissive. That's another thing too, is to speak confidently, but let the person on the other side run the pace because they're the ones entering everything in.
Right.
If you move too far ahead and your order's a little bit complicated, I have to fall behind and ask you to catch up, and that slows us both down.
Well, that's a good guiding principle right there. It's like I, in the drive-thru, can't see the person taking the order, so I don't know what's going on with them, you know? And so you got to adapt to that speed.
Yeah, and at a McDonald's, you kind of can because of the system at a McDonald's. If you pull up to a modern drive-thru at McDonald's, the external menus are screens, and you'll actually see the items as they're entering it, which is, yeah, so you can actually kind of respond to that.
That is a big innovation, yeah.
We have that at my hamburger restaurant as well. And what's nice is if someone says extra ice or, you know, light ice, you can mishear those pretty easily. And so if you enter that wrong, they can correct you and you can fix it.
You mentioned earlier, I think you said the phrase senior coffee. What is this?
It's a small coffee at a discount.
How small is small?
Regular small, like what you would consider a normal coffee, probably like a 12-ounce cup.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how old do you have to be and what qualifications do you have to have?
We don't check. Anyone can order senior coffee.
Wow.
It simply makes the coffee 99 cents instead of like, I think $1.39. I don't even know what the actual price is, but it's $1.09 with tax. That's one of the few prices I have internally memorized. Mm-hmm. I was telling my dad about this. He was telling me that Wendy's has a senior coffee for 25 cents.
Oh,
wow.
That's significantly different.
Yeah. But he did say it's not as consistent or good as some of the other places. So, you know, maybe you get what you pay for.
Are there refills on anything?
Inside, we do refills.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite things is to work the floor, and I will just take the carafe and put it on a tray with some cream cheese to walk around and give people refills. They are delighted because it's so unexpected. We do table service, which is also kind of strange, but it's to get people kind of away from congregating around the front registers. Mm-hmm. They take a little number and then we'll bring it out, which again, for a fast food place is a little bit strange, but it's all designed around this concept of efficiency. But when it's slow, especially on the weekends, and you have people kind of, you know, lingering, chatting, hanging out, reading, it's so fun to bring the carafe of coffee around. It's one of my favorite things.
Cool. Well, I have, as always, a lot more questions, but I'm going to save it. And we're going to move into our plea for advertisers. All right. And here's an ad break, but we do not yet have an advertiser. The advertiser could be you. Are you interested in reaching the business and burger savvy listeners of Hamburger Business Review? Well, imagine us telling everybody all about your business, your project, or whatever you're up to right now. Wouldn't that be great? Reach out to us at hamburgerbusinessreview.com for information about becoming a podcast sponsor. We'll make it worth your while, and we'd love to sell your stuff. All right, on to McTrot. Zach, this is your domain. I have listened to the back catalog. I'm aware of McTrot. I want you to give us, you know, the overview of what is this thing? What is sort of the history here?
McTrot is an annual challenge that I do. And the challenge is to eat at every McDonald's in Manhattan within 24 hours, entirely on foot. No subways, no trains, no skateboards.
Wow.
Walking only.
I didn't realize no trains. I thought you were allowed to take the subway.
Not at all.
Wow. How many miles?
It's about 70,000 steps, I think was the last one, which is about 35 miles of walking.
Are you tracking this with some kind of like pedometer or?
Yeah, I've got the Apple Health pedometer. That was what I used last year. I've also got like I did a geo track, like a geo kind of Strava-like thing last year, but I'm going to get better at that this year.
That's such a large amount of steps. Do you have to charge your devices during the 24 hours?
Yeah, I have brought an extra battery, and I think that gets me through it pretty much. I've also taken like 4-hour naps or so at home. I live in a place where this is kind of strategically I can stop at home and do that. But I'm trying not to do that this year. I'm going to try and do one straight run. It's
okay. You're trying to go through every McDonald's in Manhattan on foot in some kind of order. You're determining that order on a map?
Yeah. The first 2 years, what I do is I've bought just paper maps of Manhattan and use my label maker to put down labels where all the McDonald's are. And I just kind of make a strategy. And I look at the hours that the McDonald's are open. That's really important. They're not all 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And generally, the last 2 years, my strategy has been to go clockwise or counterclockwise. And that kind of includes Broadway and Central Park. And you're either doing the west side all the way up to Inwood and then back down, or the reverse. This year, boy, there's a lot of stuff I've been working on to try and actually find a better route and find the best route. But this is coming up soon, and I'm not sure I'll have the time. But the strategy this year, the general idea, is going to be to start in Inwood and go all the way down and finish at Wall Street. And so there's going to be a lot more zigzagging.
Oh, so you're going to go back and forth east to west and work your way all the way down.
Yeah, pretty much. I think I might have to...
Yeah, like a robot vacuum cleaner, like, you know, or a mower, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. I might have to prioritize some, if it gets late, some ones that aren't open 24 hours, and I'll have to like get those and then circle back to the ones that are. But that's kind of the general idea I have this year.
And so what time of year does this normally happen, and when is it happening this year?
The first year, it started because my partner was working a 24-hour shift in the hospital. And so I had 24 hours to do whatever I wanted. It was a holiday. I wasn't going home.
And this is what you wanted.
You said, I've got 24 hours. I've got, how many McDonald's are there, by the way?
48.
40. Okay.
I think there have been different numbers over the years based on what's open and closed and whatnot, but 48 right now, I think.
And you said, okay, a great way to spend 24 hours is to go to 48 McDonald's.
I was just curious if I could do it. And I was coming out of a pandemic where I had eaten a lot of McDonald's. I'd spent a lot of time before I moved to New York City living in sort of very remote car-centric suburbs. Mm-hmm. And I'd gained a lot of weight, went through McDonald's partly through stress eating, partly through convenience, partly because I love it. I'd done long, ambitious walks before, and I thought, is this possible? I looked at it and thought, it's not obviously yes or obviously no. So I sort of had to find out.
So now that you've done it twice, how close to the edge of possibility is it? Like, is it actually a challenge to complete all these things?
The first year I missed, I think, 2 restaurants because they were closed on Thanksgiving.
Oh.
And I still made it within I want to say less than 10 minutes. I'll have to go back and look, but it was very close.
Wow.
And part of that is me just kind of trying to estimate and being tired and wanting breaks.
But that in a 24-hour period, that's a photo finish. That's tight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's very tight. And I think this last year I got it down to, I had maybe 20 minutes, 24 minutes to spare.
That's pretty dramatic, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that means a traffic jam or a wrong turn, especially with changing to a zigzag pattern, it's wildly going to change how this thing works.
There's that's kind of what makes it exciting, or has made it exciting, is not that original spirit of not knowing if it's possible or if it's going to be possible this time.
Well, and so again, help me understand the rules. You're doing it on foot. It's got to be all the stores in Manhattan that are, currently in business, I guess, and open that day.
Yeah.
You're eating stuff at these places?
I eat pretty much 1 packet of apple slices whenever I can. Sometimes they're out, but that's kind of the order.
At every restaurant?
Yeah. And so it's 15 calories and it's $1.50. It's between $1 and $2. There's 48 restaurants. I think I ate 3 dozen packets of apple slices last year.
So at any point during the day, do you get a meal, or are you just doing apple slices straight through?
Yeah. Last year I took a meal. I took a definitive kind of dinner break for a chicken sandwich.
There's a concept in video games of optimal path making, when you're designing a game for maybe a roguelike of how these characters are going to move on the screen that you're interacting with, that is all coded to be what's the fastest way to get this character to here with these obstacles. And I'm sure as you're describing this map, especially on the grid of Manhattan, this does seem like a wildly complicated math problem.
Well, and a non-designed route. They didn't lay it out to do this. You're trying to lay it out to do this.
Absolutely correct on both counts. The mathematics are fascinating. In general, they call this the traveling salesman problem, where you have a list of things to get to. They're different distances apart. What's the shortest route, or the least costly route to get to all of them? In the context of McTrot, it kind of becomes that you also have to account for which restaurants are open when. There's some literature about TSP, traveling salesman problem, TSP-TW, which is with time windows of when the different things are open and when you can actually get in there. The basic thing about the traveling salesman problem is that there's 48 restaurants. So the number of possible ways to get through is 48 times 47 times 46 and so on.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And that's a number that's
Is that 48 factorial? Is that what that is?
Yeah, I think so. And there's not enough grains of sand in the universe. And definitely not enough time on my computer or space on, to enumerate all of these.
You're solving an unsolvable problem.
I mean, it's solvable. It's just real big,
But I mean, so big that we can't easily do it even with the massive amount of computers we all have around us all the time.
From what I understand, even you can find a solution, but knowing that you've found definitively that you've found the fastest solution might be impossible.
Wow.
Yeah. And the method is called simulated annealing, where you sort of take a guess, make a change, see if it improves. But you don't do that too much. You also sometimes take a bad guess just in case it's going to lead you to a better place.
This is frankly incredible. I mean, like you're applying a lot of, math, and you're doing a physical challenge at the same time.
To be fair, I'm not doing the math yet. I'm just kind of understanding it, but it is there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So what? How does the plan get made? Do you just sit there and kind of throw darts at a map, or just draw a big circle or something?
Yeah, basically, I'll pick a starting restaurant, a time, and a clockwise or counterclockwise. But this time, I think again, if I don't get the computer stuff up and running, which we'll see, the plan is to just print out a map, start at the top, and kind of make a rough plan.
Is there any gear? Like, I mean, I know you bring probably your phone and, is there like a backpack, or do you wear a shirt that says McTrot? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Sometimes people who are on big walks, they'll have sort of a flag with them or something.
I've thought of that stuff. I think right now I just want to keep a low profile and get it done. And in terms of a backpack, it's really about keeping weight down. Mm-hmm. I think even a modest weight backpack would bother me after 12 miles. And so 35 miles, it would definitely be a problem.
Wow.
Yeah, what are you wearing? Are you wearing like performance gear?
Yeah. When it's late November in New York, so.
Yeah. Well, so it's going to be a week before Thanksgiving. The first year I did it in a turtleneck and jeans, and it was hard. And there was chafing.
Oh no.
There was sweat. I did thermals last year. That kind of helped. But mostly, this is like a whole separate subject, but it's been a journey of like my own fitness improvement. Mm-hmm. This last year, especially when I work out and when I fix my herniated disc and do all these, physical therapy exercises, McTrot is the reason. It's what keeps me sort of focused and keeps me excited about this is all adding up to something. I'm going to do a better time this year.
You're pushing that incline on the treadmill, being like, I know there's going to be that hill. I got to be ready for it.
No incline because of the back disc. It's a whole thing. It starts with incline and I have to turn it down to 0.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's almost making me like one of those quantified self people, which I've never been. Mm-hmm. And it's funny. I feel like McDonald's is very much from that universe too, of what can we digitize and efficient, make more efficient.
If I take off my Apple Watch and I walk around, or I go up and down a flight of stairs, did it really happen? I don't get the little stars and, miracles of, oh, you did it,
Yeah.
I track my sleep, and I will like get up and go get my watch before I take a nap. It's so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
How does your watch know if it's resting or if it's resting on you?
You tell it.
There's a little button for sleep. Yeah,
it knows. Okay.
Well, we're going to be asking a lot more about McTrot next week, and I guess it's time for the case study.
This case study is McDonald's China, the expired meat scandal, and it comes to us from Claudia Wu and Xingang Tao.
Yeah, this comes out of the university in Hong Kong's Asia Case Research Center, which I imagine is a place that just makes case studies. At least I hope so. And it's from 2015, not long after the expired meat scandal happened in China. This was not just a problem in China. There's the entire Asia Pacific region of McDonald's, but then it also impacted McDonald's internationally. There was effects on the stock price.
I'm curious, prior to this, had both of you heard of this scandal? Because I had never heard of this.
I had never heard of this.
I had not heard of this specific one. I did look it up thinking, I was like, this sounds familiar, and it was something else.
A different meat scandal, yeah.
They actually talk about the sort of history of meat scandals in China, and there was kind of an ongoing problem with the way that things were regulated. So that does actually come up. But yeah, let's jump right into this.
They trace this back to China's market reforms starting in 1978. And it really seems like a couple of things have happened between that time and the time when we get to our case study. For one thing, lots of foreign investment came to China. The meat market grew tremendously. All of the growth in worldwide meat production, most of that was happening in China, it seems like.
Yeah, related to that, I've been reading this book, McDonald's Behind the Arches by John Love. He talks about the launch in China. It was in Hong Kong, and the person they partnered with kind of gave up this promising career in like venture capital and said the pessimism was pervasive. The consensus was the Chinese eat rice, not hamburgers. But since I was Chinese, I knew Chinese people at least didn't hate the hamburger. And I concluded that if I could sell the best quality product in a clean environment and at a reasonable price, I'd have a chance. And I think that's interesting that his personal experience and the people around him were basically saying like, you can't do this here because it's a different culture, but we see that it was changing. He recognized the change of that larger trend that you were talking about.
That definitely echoes our original case study about McDonald's coming to Russia for the first time in, I believe it was 89 or 91 or something. And the thought was, yeah, like these are good. We eat them.
Going back to the same book, Love pointed out that McDonald's opening in Beijing was in April of 91, and it shattered the opening day record that had been set in Moscow. So it attracted some 40,000 customers.
Wow.
And they had like 29 cash registers open to handle this flow. So it was
lined up around the block.
Yeah, which is amazing because you had Russia just exploded and became this figure. And we all remember that. Like that was a big deal. There's iconic images. I don't feel like we have that culturally of it launching in China.
Not yet anyways.
Well, and also you think of Russia and China. I think of Russia and China in that era anyway as not being, it's now kind of oppositional, right? Like we're not the friendliest countries. And here they are breaking the record. That's cool.
What strikes me about the growth of the meat production system in China is that it's so fast and it proceeds with such volume. The United States went through a long period of producing more meat and the scandals with Upton Sinclair and the jungle and, lots of legislation, lots of scandals exactly like this one about how to make meat safely.
Have we actually explained what the meat scandal here was?
No. So the inciting event is in late July of, I think, July 20th or so. State-funded news reporting in China. They did this sort of investigative journalism about expired meat being bagged up and reintroduced into the production line at suppliers that supply beef to McDonald's.
And this is in 2015?
2014, yeah. What's interesting about the dates is that on that July 20th, when this undercover investigation airs, it's only 3 days later that 6 executives of this meat company are arrested by the Public Security Bureau, going from, oh, here's a media story to, oh, we've arrested them. 6 people have been arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Seems so quick and so fast. And there are then conspiracy theories from foreign press, non-Chinese press, about that this is actually a entire operation by the Chinese government to tamp down on foreign influence of food manufacturing.
Right. The other thing that strikes me about this is that the growth in the meat production business with these fast food companies coming in is so centralized. I imagine centralized in a way that China has not done meat production until this time. With that centralization, if something goes wrong, lots of people are very quickly affected. It becomes a very big sort of target for McDonald's to wear on its back in terms of its reputation.
And because they didn't have that infrastructure yet to create that amount of, beef product, they partnered with this company out of Chicago that had long had a relationship with McDonald's called OSI. OSI sets up this Chinese subsidiary, and they start supplying beef and chicken products, not just to McDonald's, but to many of the different fast food companies that are entering China. So, Burger King, KFC, Pizza Hut, all these companies are being served by this now massive subsidiary of the American conglomerate. And so again, conspiracy hat, tinfoil hat on is China doing something here to sort of highlight this? However, it is a real problem. Like they talk about, they know when the inspectors are coming and they're hiding these like giant blue bags of rotten meat from the inspectors because they know when they're coming.
Expired.
Not rotten, expired meat.
Yeah. Which is a whole question for me I have. Why is there expired meat in the meat processing plant? Like, it just seems like an inefficiency that they're not.
Well, also, how expired is it? Is one of the things I wonder.
Yeah, we don't know.
I think with food safety in general, it's really squishy. And for different people, for different objects, it's very different. Like you look at the bottom of your water bottle and it has a date, right?
Right.
And you think, well, this is ridiculous, And then you look at, a thing of salt and maybe it has a date. And like, that's also ridiculous.
The plastic packaging is going bad, actually, before the salt.
Yeah, you think of something that's like it literally is organic matter that is stored at a temperature. Like it's going to go bad. The question is just, is it like going to happen in 3 days or what?
When I was at McDonald's in high school in Alaska, and I was not very good at following the rules, and this is a good reason not to hire teenagers in general, but we had a thing we called the McJesus burger, which was at the time, I think McDonald's has everything to order now, so this doesn't exist, but there were these kind of containers that were sort of these humid containers that you'd know the lunch rush was coming, you'd grill up a bunch of beef patties, and you put them in these containers, and they had a timer on them. And the timer would be like, oh, this has been here for too long. The meat's going to be dried out. Toss it, put some new ones in to kind of keep everything ready all the time. Well, when that timer would turn off, we would simply reset the timer and say, hallelujah,
yeah, hallelujah.
He has risen.
Right.
The meat's come back. Yeah. So again, I understand that these efficiency, all of these things are put in place for both quality, but also health reasons. But when you start just like grinding people through the gears in terms of labor, you also are going to lose some of that ability to maintain that level of quality. And I suspect that's probably what's happening in an environment like this.
What happens in 2014 to OSI in China at this time, Mike, as a result of this news story?
They are effectively shut down. I mean, what's interesting is like McDonald's ends up, obviously, like everyone, including all of the other chains, everyone stops using the subsidiary and says, we're not going to participate anymore with this company. What I found interesting in the case study was they end up kind of developing 5 different companies, kind of recreating that supply chain with these 5 different local players. And now they have this diversification of options as well. And they're not so trapped because things got so bad in that region that the restaurants were only able to sell the fish sandwich. That was the only thing, it was the only entree on the menu, which is, you think what's going on with McDonald's and the Quarter Pounder is bad. Imagine if McDonald's turned into the fish fillet restaurant.
Uh-huh.
The case study addresses this. They basically say that 2 bad things happened. I mean, apart from whatever happened with the expired meat. But the first is that these restaurants could only serve the fish sandwich until August, which I think is like 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. And then the second is just that OSI gets broken up and nobody wants to do business with OSI anymore.
It really feels like lesson learned as they come up with the 5 new companies that they're going to source from. The part that we've seen be exposed via what's going on right now in the United States with the Quarter Pounder and the slivered onions, and the person who comes up and starts speaking to us about health safety and suddenly it's exposing some of the supply chain issues is really interesting because I think so much of that stuff happens at the corporate high level, especially on the international scale. And we really just think of these restaurants as, oh, there's one, you truck stuff in, it's fine. And yeah, that was something that I found with this case study is Asia Pacific was one of the fastest growing regions. And that was why shutting it down had such a huge impact, not just locally, but internationally and with the company at large. Like share price dropped, I think it was like almost 5%, and global sales were down everywhere. Anytime you hear these stories, as we've seen, it impacts everyone when these stories come up.
And the case study sort of assesses what happened to OSI and asks what you would do if you were in McDonald's shoes. What can they do for supply chain management? What can they do for building trust with the consumer? And should they run their own plants in China for processing meat?
I think if you go all the way back to kind of Ray Kroc, Fred Turner, early days of McDonald's, they talk about this 3-legged stool that is the franchisees, the suppliers, and the employees. I don't think there's ever a point at which McDonald's wants to be in the supplier business itself. It wants to have those relationships. Sort of the innovation of early McDonald's was we are not going to screw over the franchisees for the suppliers and take some kickback or vice versa. They're really willing to say, we're going to take our cut from everybody, but it's going to be a lot of money because we're trying to scale as big as possible. So I don't think McDonald's is looking to become its own supplier or to vertically integrate.
There's a 4th leg to that stool that didn't get talked about, which is the U.S. government. And we have USDA, different agencies that do inspection, that do set a baseline. And I hadn't thought about it until I read this case study, but it seems like McDonald's really benefits from that. Not only are they offloading their own work of inspecting the meat plants to some degree, but they're also in the US ensuring that their competitors play by the same rules. And it seems really hard to have that in the middle of last century in China. The way that that happens, as we find out in this case study, is that the media comes after this and makes sort of investigative journalism and gets the public involved. Without a government coming in and doing the inspections for them, what are their options? I think they kind of have to have their own supplier. They kind of have to become their own supplier of meat.
I think that they become dependent in a way on those suppliers that is hard to differentiate exactly what the difference is between, is this a subsidiary or what is that kind of relationship like? But I do think in looking at the response to the E. coli, we saw McDonald's be more aggressive and were kind of ahead of the agencies. And I do think that that's not because McDonald's is quote unquote good. I think that's a learned crisis management response because this has happened before and it will happen again. And I think McDonald's has developed a playbook of how to get ahead of that.
But that's a crisis management. It doesn't prevent the crisis from happening in the first place, which is, I think, like we talked about in the last episode about deforestation in the Amazon, it's like McDonald's should have known. They do similar research to know that the average cattle herd is 36 cows. They should be able to track this down and know this much. And yet when these crises happen, we realize that they haven't been.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to incentives. They're not incentivized to find out either. They want a little bit of plausible deniability. And I think they are willing to push far enough that they have always a reason to say, hey, we work on this and this is important to us.
I was looking at the stock chart for McDonald's and looking at this big downward slope because of the onion thing and wondering how many similar downward slopes were caused by a slip up like this in the past. It's got to be quite a few. We talk about incentives. It seems like there's got to be financial incentive to at least imagine a McDonald's that had fewer of these crises and would be in a different position. And I wonder how much of that gets actually calculated and how much of it is like kind of a gut feel of, yeah, we want to do better, but we'll never be perfect.
Zach, I think we're in that universe. I think we're already in that sliding doors universe of McDonald's doing everything it can to prevent. I think they are doing absolutely more than is required because they've seen the downside of this so many times. And I think with this E. coli slivered onion situation, I think we're seeing the implementation of all of these learned lessons about both how to get ahead of it, how to shut it down quickly, how to respond with the appropriate level of, seeming care and understanding and quickness. Like, I think we're seeing the best version of McDonald's, which, again, still had the problem. I don't think you can get better than this.
And the case study makes this point that it's a which game are you playing? McDonald's in China originally went for the role of being sort of a distinctive premium product, that it's an American thing. It actually did come from a different supply chain at first.
It's funny that they kind of positioned it as fast casual before that term really existed.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got more Chinese competitors, more like Chinese hamburger restaurants coming in the space and had to compete more on price. And I think in that competitive situation, again, it really hurts them not to have a level playing field in China.
Like they're incentivized to help develop that level playing field?
Yes. Or to create a mini version on their own, just so that when a crisis like this happens to one of their competitors, they can say, look at our wonderful beef production in China.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can't find the acronym now, but there is a meat equivalent to GAAP, the generally acceptable accounting principles.
Okay.
that was referenced in this case study. And I looked it up and even if I remembered what it was, it would be meaningless. But it's essentially a FDA document that says this is how you should operate for all of these different industries when you're dealing with food. In the case study, they talk about applying that, as they move forward. Part of that is these more ad hoc visits and the new meat suppliers and all of this other, all the other initiatives that they're doing to prevent this kind of stuff going forward. But it doesn't seem, based on this case study, it's not being mandated by the Chinese government, right? It's mandated by McDonald's trying to protect its brand value.
So you think they can still do that even if they don't own the suppliers?
Yeah, I think it's actually better for them not to own the suppliers, because I think there's an inevitability to these kinds of problems. And I think that having now 5 new meat suppliers in China lets them say, shut this one down. That wasn't us. Whereas if it was a plant with a big McDonald's sign on it, that would be worse for them.
It's not too big to fail. Yeah. Okay.
How do we wrap this up?
I mean, from a purely capitalist point of view, do you just set some money aside and wait for these things to happen so that you can invest in McDonald's, whether it's a 5 or 7% drop, and just make a quick return? Or are you better off investing over time and just riding the wave?
As an outside capitalist.
You mean as an investor?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I don't have the sophistication to do this, but I think one thing would be every time the stock price has gone over 300 in the last year or 2 years, it's fallen because of some perceived problem. Either the food is too expensive, or not just a perceived problem. There's real conflict in Israel that is driving a lot of protest in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world. And now this onion thing. And so I wouldn't know how to enact this, but I think when things are going well at McDonald's, we should be waiting for the other shoe to drop sometimes.
Yeah, there's always a problem somewhere when you're operating at this scale.
And if it hasn't been in the news recently, it will be in the news soon. And so that would be a time to sell.
Thank you so much for listening to Hamburger Business Review. I do want to say, if you like this podcast, you might also be interested in this new book. My friend Aiden sent me a link to mcatlas.com, where Gary He, who is a James Beard winning photographer and writer, he has traveled the world to document all of the kind of local and unique aberrations to the standardization of McDonald's. It's a fancy art book. I think it costs like $50, but I pre-ordered it. I don't have any stake in it. I'm just interested in it. I find it interesting. You might also.
We'll be back next week with another case study, more on Mike's Hamburger Restaurant, and the news.
And we'll come back for more about Zach's annual attempt to eat at every McDonald's in Manhattan. Our theme music is from John Bechtolt's Jazz Around.
And our social media manager is Colette Wacker. This is an independent production, and you can support us by signing up at hamburgerbusinessreview.com, where you can also buy some merch. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back with you next week.
My Hamburger Restaurant. My Hamburger Restaurant. My Hamburger Restaurant.
Shorter, quicker.
My Hamburger Restaurant. The Hamburger Restaurant.
Good. Thank you.
Hamburger Restaurant. Hamburger. Okay. Yeah. So